If you know me well enough, you know that this YouTube channel was started off with the basis of being a Call of Duty commentary channel. As a result, I was a big fan of all the Call of Duty commentary people who made those types of videos in the past, and still do to this day. One of those guys is Drifter, who has a series on his YouTube channel called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where he dissects Call of Duty games and discusses those three main points. Let's bring that format over here to the hockey channel and talk about the Vancouver Canucks offseason up until this point, at 2:30 a.m. October 13th, Tuesday. That's when I'm recording this video, so anything that happens after 2:30 a.m. in the morning is not going to be covered here. But we're talking today about the Vancouver Canucks offseason and breaking these things up into three categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because it's no secret this Vancouver Canucks offseason has been emotional. It's been very, very testing of my capacity of being a hockey fan and being a Vancouver Canucks fan. It really hurts. Ang magmahal na ganito. And that is something that you can see on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Reddit, all these social media platforms with Vancouver Canucks fans. They've been super emotional because this has been a roller coaster. So let's go over the good things the Vancouver Canucks have done this offseason thus far. Starting in chronological order, first off, it is the Braden Holtby signing. What they did here was they took a 2-year contract and they applied it to a guy who is a legitimate NHL goaltender. Granted, he's been coming off of a few poor years in comparison to what people think a number one goaltender in the NHL should be like. But Braden Holtby wasn't brought to the Vancouver Canucks to be a number one goalie. He was brought to split the reins with Thatcher Demko. He will be a veteran presence. His contract is 2 years long. He will be eligible for the expansion draft because there's no trade protection on this contract, which is very, very good to see. Plus the cap hit, it's only $4.3 million AAV, which is not bad in the slightest. It's a good move because this is a move that sets up the Vancouver Canucks for success in the expansion draft, and it allows Thatcher Demko to become the number one into the long-term future. It'll keep him on the team, and it will give him the guidance of a Stanley Cup championship goaltender over these next 2 seasons. That experience, that guidance could carry over into the rest of Demko's career. Secondly, we have another former Washington Capitals under the good category here for the Vancouver Canucks. Nate Schmidt was a Vancouver Canucks trade that happened yesterday. It was a 2022 third-round pick in exchange for the left-handed right-side playing defender who can get upwards of 30 points in a season, maybe even more, with the way that he plays, where he's able to headman the puck out very nicely, log up some big minutes, skate the puck up nicely too, and do some very good things in his own zone. Nate Schmidt is already the second best defender on this Vancouver Canucks squad behind Quinn Hughes, and that's not a hyperbole here. Even though he is making a contract that is under $6 million, there's no doubt, for the short term, this guy benefits the club now. Who knows, maybe by the time Schmidt is 33, 34, this contract can look terrible, but for the short term what you get is a very good defender, and this guy clogs up the right side, which is indeed something the Canucks needed. We'll get more to that a little bit later. So for good, we have 2 things. Holtby improves the roster. Schmidt improves the roster. Now, let's move on to the bad. Firstly, the biggest thing that we have here on the bad is Oliver Ekman-Larsson. This kind of falls into place with everything else that we see later on in this video, because Oliver Ekman-Larsson was a Vancouver Canucks priority that they were super adamant on going towards and chasing, that it became their number one task on their hierarchy of objectives in the offseason. These Ekman-Larsson trade proposals for a guy who is very good, I'll say that, Ekman-Larsson's a good player, but his contract is huge, his contract is long, and the Coyotes were looking to get some very good assets back from the Vancouver Canucks, including things like Demko, Podkolzin, Höglander, etc. This negotiation was so important to the Canucks that it pushed itself in front of the other things the team needed to do. Markstrom, Tanev, Toffoli, Stetcher. It's common belief in the media that all these other things came second to the Oliver Ekman-Larsson trade proposals, and nothing actually came to fruition instead. Even though Nate Schmidt was a good trade, a third for Schmidt, that's much better than what would have went down if the Canucks went with the Arizona Coyotes offer in the Oliver Ekman-Larsson negotiations. It is absolutely 100% better. But the fact is, these Ekman-Larsson trade proposals kind of acted as the big domino that caused everything else to go wrong going forward with this Vancouver Canucks UFA situation. So, let's go over onto more of the bad. Troye Stetcher signing with the Red Wings. This is a contract that the Vancouver Canucks fanbase would have loved to see Jim Benning pull out for Troye Stetcher, the Richmond man. He was making $2-point-something million a season before this new contract, and now he goes over to Detroit. It's a 1.7 AAV for 2 years, which is a very good deal. It's cheaper than what the Canucks said they wanted to do, because Jim Benning reportedly told Stetcher that he wanted to get him back on a similar deal to what he was making beforehand, but Troye Stetcher was already losing out on money because the team didn't qualify him, and combined with the fact that Oliver Ekman-Larsson was the number one priority, it pushed Stetcher to a point where he decided to go to Detroit, where he said they're a team that wanted him. And that is important in these negotiations, because when you let players feel like they are second or third on your list of priorities, first off, you cause holdups. You get people waiting, and you get them in a position of uncertainty, and that is never what you want to do to a client. It happened with Troye Stetcher here, which is why it's in the bad, and it also happened with Tyler Toffoli. His contract here, $4.25 million over the span of 4 years as an AAV, a total of $17 million. That is indeed a contract that the Vancouver Canucks, had they signed Toffoli to, would be praised for giving it out. Montreal, you guys got a good player over here, but the fact that Vancouver Canucks contract negotiations and talks got to a point where Toffoli was willing to accept a contract like this from Montreal indicates further the poor asset management on this front. So for the bad, we have three things. It is Ekman-Larsson, because that kind of took control over everything and nothing ended up happening. We had Troye Stetcher, who signed a very cheap contract with Detroit because he felt more wanted by that organization than the Vancouver Canucks, and Tyler Toffoli, who experienced a similar situation. Now on to the ugly. These are the things that the Vancouver Canucks really didn't have too much control over, but they were indeed just ugly to look at per se. First up, Jacob Markstrom and Tanev signing with Calgary. I put this in the ugly category and not the bad category, because when the Calgary Flames are bidding 6x6 for Markstrom and $4.5 million AAV contracts to Chris Tanev, that's kind of something you can't really deal with, because it was inevitable that a team out there would have offered this kind of money. Markstrom was getting offered 7 years by Edmonton, reportedly speaking, and he turned that down to go to Calgary for 6x6. And that's just ugly, because the Canucks also had this on top of their priority list. Like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Markstrom was reportedly one of the top priorities for the Canucks. And it pushed Stetcher, it pushed Toffoli, it pushed everybody else down in terms of the contract negotiation. So by the time it was done, hey, Stecher, Toffoli, these guys, they've waited so long for these contract negotiations to cover up, and what the Vancouver Canucks have to show for it is a losing bid to the Calgary Flames, who are willing to overpay Markstrom and Tanev. It's ugly, it's unfortunate. They didn't have control over the fact that Calgary would have been willing to shell out so much more money than the Vancouver Canucks would have been comfortable with. And at the same time, if it was the Canucks who signed Markstrom and Tanev to these kinds of contracts, then the fan base probably would have been super ticked off, because those are some pretty big numbers. But the last thing we have over here for the ugly is the remnants of Jake Vertanin and Brandon Sutter. The fact that Vertanin was qualified. This is kind of what was seen by many people as the big straw that allowed Toffoli to go to free agency and become signed by Montreal. Because by qualifying Jake Vertanin, you essentially choose him over Toffoli. That's kind of how it works here, because Vertanin filed for arbitration. As for Brandon Sutter, the fact that he is still on this team could be seen as either a positive or a negative, because he does have a year left. If you bought this guy out, the remaining money on his contract would have been cut into 2/3, spread over the span of 2 years instead of 1, which you could see as somewhat of a negative, because Hughes, Pettersson, their contracts are going to be needing re-signings and extensions in a year. But if you bought out Sutter, you would have been able to save a few bucks in the short term. You could have used that to re-sign some of the guys that were in that bad column that the Canucks ended up leaving out to dry. Toffoli, Stetcher, etc. So that's kind of what we have here for the ugly. It is Tanev and Markstrom getting hugely offered by the Calgary Flames, and Vertanin and Sutter still remaining on this team, because the salary implications of having these guys still here kind of changed up the entire dynamic in the contract negotiations with Toffoli, with Stetcher. It changed up the way that they proceeded with guys like Markstrom and Tanev, and as a result, it pushed other guys down further in the priority list. So, this is our good. It is the Schmidt trade, it is the Holtby signing, the bad, Toffoli, Stetcher leaving, and the Oliver Ekman-Larsson negotiations. And for the ugly, it is those three that we talked about before. So talk to me in the comments what you think about this assessment of the Canucks offseason so far. There are some good things, there are some bad things, and there are definitely some ugly things, but I want you to tell me in the comments if I've missed anything, if I'm wrong in my assessment, whatever you're feeling, let me hear it. Again, this video is being recorded at 2:30 a.m. in the morning on October 13th, Tuesday PST. So anything that happened after this video's recording, I'm not talking about here, but all that stuff applies. I hope you enjoyed this video. That's Troye, and bye.